November 8, 1942. Operation Torch begins. As shells pound the shore, GIS drag secret crates onto the beach and pry them open, expecting rifles. Instead, they find steel tubes, uncharted, untested, and with just 7 usable rockets. With no manuals, under machine gun fire, a paratrooper shoulders the odd device and fires. Moments later, a French Renault tank smolders, destroyed by something the Germans would soon call America's tank killer, the Bazooka. That single shot will force Nazi commanders to rewrite their playbook and start an arms race. But how did a scrap-built prototype leap from an Aberdeen junkyard to shatter the armored spearhead of the Axis? The answer begins in the chaos that followed. Salt spray clung to the crates stamped secret as they landed hard in the surf at Fadala. Riflemen, boots sinking in wet sand, pried off the lids with bayonets. Inside, instead of carbines or grenades, lay unfamiliar steel tubes, cold, heavy, and without a single page of instruction. Rockets, packed in fiberboard sleeves, spilled out, many already soaked and swelling from seawater. Shouts cut through the chaos. Only a handful of rockets were dry enough to try. Machine gun rounds cracked overhead as men scrambled to assemble the odd weapons, connecting wires by guesswork and peering down improvised sights made from bent wire. The first team, crouched behind a sand dune, struggled to fit the battery clip. The circuit sparked, then fizzled. Another team managed to load a rocket, but the firing switch stuck, salt water shorting the contact. Out of 20 rockets, only 7 would fire that morning. Some GIs tried to warm the batteries in their hands. Others shook water from the tubes and wiped sand from the contacts, hoping for a miracle. No manuals had arrived with the weapons. The only guide was a mimeographed half-sheet, already blurred and torn by the damp. Most squads had never seen the device before. Training had been a 5-minute talk from a harried sergeant, now missing in the confusion. Still, the order was clear. Move forward, use what you have, and stop anything with tracks. French Renault R-35s rolled into view, their engines whining over the din. A Bazooka crew braced for the shot, sighting through the wire and squeezing the trigger. The rocket hissed out, trailing smoke. One tank halted, its crew shaken but unhurt. Another rocket struck a track, sending sparks across the sand. Some tanks reversed, others pressed on. The effect was uncertain. No fireballs, just scorched paint and confusion. Yet the weapon's presence changed the rhythm of the fight. French tank commanders hesitated, wary of the new threat. GIs, though frustrated by duds and misfires, saw that even a near miss could force armor to pause or withdraw. As the beachhead held, lessons were burned into memory. Waterproof everything, improvise under fire, and trust that even a handful of working rockets could make the difference between survival and disaster. 7 rockets remained. The paratrooper team from the 509th, faces streaked with sweat and grit, crouched behind a low wall as a Renault R-35 advanced, its turret scanning for movement. The loader snapped a dry rocket into place, checking the battery clip with numb fingers. The gunner steadied the tube, sighting through the bent wire. He squeezed the trigger. This time the circuit held. A sharp hiss, a trail of smoke, and the rocket streaked toward the tank. The warhead struck just above the track, punching a fist-sized dent into the armor and sending a spray of metal fragments across the hull. The R-35 lurched to a stop. Its crew bailed out, leaving the engine running, hatches swinging open. Nearby, another team fired their last serviceable round. The rocket hit low, glancing off the side plate and detonating in a burst of sand and sparks. The tank reversed, tracks grinding, then stalled. Inside the perimeter, GIs cheered, watching as French tankers abandoned machines that, moments before, had seemed unstoppable. Of the 20 rockets landed on the beach, only 7 worked. Each shot counted. After-action reports from the 509th recorded a single confirmed immobilization and several forced withdrawals. No tank brewed up in a fireball. Instead, the bazooka's effect was measured in hesitation and confusion. Tanks halted, crews shaken, infantry emboldened. The weapon's flaws were plain. Water-damaged rockets failed to ignite, circuits corroded in the salt air, sights bent out of alignment with each hurried assembly. Yet the principle was proven. A 2-man team, given a handful of working rockets and a scrap metal tube, could force armor to break off an attack. As the smoke cleared over Fadala, battered tubes lay scattered in the sand. Lessons scrawled in field notebooks called for better waterproofing, sturdier batteries, clearer instructions. But the memory of a tank crew abandoning their post at the site of a single rocket trail would travel far, carried in after-action reports, retold in mess tents, and soon relayed to the men designing the next generation of America's tank killer. May 6, 1942. Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. Lieutenant Edward Wool crossed the ordnance yard with a scavenged steel tube slung over his shoulder, a length of coat hanger twisted into a makeshift sight. He had been told to create a rocket launcher for the M10-shaped charge grenade. Nothing more than an engineer's challenge with no blueprint, no time, and no spare parts. The only tube long enough came from the scrap pile, 60 inches of battered steel, still flecked with old paint. The sight was bent wire, secured with electrical tape. The firing circuit, a tangle of copper and battery leads, sparked to life with a stiff click. A handful of officers gathered behind the sandbagged test line. Brigadier General Gladian Barnes, head of Army Ordnance Research, watched with arms folded. UHL loaded the prototype, braced the tube against his shoulder, and sighted through the wire at a rusted tank hull set downrange. The order was given. UHL squeezed the trigger. The rocket hissed out, trailing a streak of smoke, and struck the target with a sharp metallic thud. A second shot, then a third. Each one slammed into the plate, gouging deep craters where the spigot mortars had left only dents. The shaped charge warhead cut through 4 inches of steel at 200 yards. Barnes broke the silence with a laugh. "Looks like Bob Burns's bazooka." The name stuck instantly. No one bothered with the technical nomenclature. The officers conferred in low voices as Uhl demonstrated the launcher's simple operation. Load, aim, fire, reload. No tripod, no complicated optics. Even a recruit could be trained in minutes. The test log, stamped with the date, recorded direct hits and armor penetration that outperformed every competing design. Within 48 hours, Barnes sent a memo to the Ordnance Department. Authorize immediate procurement, 5,000 units, priority delivery. General Electric's Bridgeport plant received the order before the week was out. The design, officially rocket launcher, M1, 2.36-inch, owed its caliber to the diameter of the M10 grenade and the size of available tubing. There was no patent application, no proprietary claim, just a government contract and a deadline measured in days, not months. Acceptance trials followed at Aberdeen and Camp Sims, with British and Soviet observers taking notes for Lend-Lease shipments. The critiques were blunt. The tube warped after repeated firing, the coat hanger sight bent easily, and the battery circuit proved unreliable in rain. But the principle was undeniable. A two-man team, armed with a scrap metal tube and a handful of rockets, could destroy a tank at close range. The test logs and procurement memos, now yellowed with age, trace the exact route from Uhl's prototype to the first mass-produced bazookas rolling off the line before summer's end. The Aberdeen demonstration, born of desperation and improvisation, launched a new chapter in infantry firepower. What began with a coat hanger and a scrap tube would soon change the face of armored warfare. General Electric's Bridgeport Works, Connecticut. Summer 1942. The order? 5,000 rocket launchers, delivery in 30 days. Assembly lines that once turned out electrical appliances now hammered, riveted, and welded steel tubes at a pace that set new benchmarks for wartime production. The design called for a 54-inch seamless tube, barely 13 pounds when loaded, with just a handful of moving parts. A modest battery circuit and a simple trigger. No tripod, no optics, no proprietary components. Each launcher cost $25. Each rocket, $8. Women in overalls crowded the workbenches, riveting sight brackets and threading wires through the tubes. Many had never handled a firearm, but by autumn they were producing 5,000 launchers a month. Posters in the break rooms showed the silhouette of the Bazooka, America's tank killer, against a backdrop of enemy armor. The workforce, drawn from all over New England, worked double shifts under fluorescent lights, their names stamped on inspection tags tucked inside each crate. Training manuals were still being written. In the interim, sergeants arrived at the plant to learn the basics: load, aim, fire, reload. Most GIs could master the bazooka in a single afternoon, compared to the weeks required for anti-tank guns. The key was simplicity. The launcher's 2.36-inch diameter matched the M10-shaped charge grenade, and its warhead could punch through 4 inches of armor at 200 yards. By October 1942, the first shipments rolled out, crates stacked on flat cars, bound for ports and airfields. Quality assurance teams checked each firing circuit, but the pace left little room for perfection. Battery life remained a concern. Some circuits drained before reaching the front. Field complaints about warped tubes and bent sights filtered back to Bridgeport, prompting quick fixes and new assembly jigs. The numbers told the story. 5,000 launchers per month, 500,000 by war's end, and 15 million rockets. The bazooka's cost flipped the arithmetic of armored warfare. A $25 tube in the hands of an infantryman could stop a machine worth $30,000. Instructors drilled squads on the basics: two-man teams, leapfrogging positions, aiming for tracks or vision slits. The weapon's spread was relentless. From North Africa to Sicily, every new shipment meant more infantrymen could challenge enemy armor. On the factory floor, a riveter named Helen signed her initials on the last launcher of the shift. That tube, like thousands before it, would soon cross an ocean and find its place on the front lines. The industrial sprint at Bridgeport had turned a scrap metal prototype into a mass-produced weapon, one that any GI could carry, assemble, and fire. The bazooka was no longer an experiment. It was standard issue, and its presence would be felt on every battlefield that followed. July 1943. Sicily's dusty crossroads and stone villages echoed with the clatter of tracks and the sharp hiss of rockets. The M1A1 Bazooka, now fitted with stabilizer fins and a more reliable rocket, had arrived in the hands of paratroopers and infantry teams. Training was brief, just enough to load, aim, and fire. But the lessons from North Africa were still fresh. Waterproofed rockets, reinforced battery clips, and a new field manual meant crews moved with confidence, hunting enemy armor from hedgerows and rubble-strewn lanes. 17 German tanks were recorded as destroyed or disabled by Bazooka teams during the campaign. In the olive groves outside Gela, a two-man crew from the 82nd Airborne waited as the roar of a Panzer column grew louder. The loader checked the circuit, wiping sweat from his brow, while the gunner steadied the tube against a crumbling wall. The first rocket streaked out, striking a Panzer IV's side skirt. The explosion tore through the thinner armor, sending the crew scrambling from the hatches. Minutes later, another team targeted a half-tracked command vehicle, immobilizing it with a single shot to the engine block. The most storied encounter came on the outskirts of Piazza Ridge. A Tiger One, its paint scorched from previous hits, rolled forward under the cover of machine gun fire. An 82nd Airborne marksman, crouched behind a shattered gatepost, aimed for the narrow vision slit. The rocket flew true, slamming into the aperture. Smoke poured from the turret as the crew abandoned the tank. The incident became legend in mess tents and after-action reports, though German loss records leave the details in dispute. Still, the effect was real. German tankers began to fear close-range ambushes, and infantry squads pressed forward, emboldened by each success. Husky's after-action reports praised the bazooka's accuracy and speed. Teams could set up in seconds, fire, and relocate before return fire found their position. The improved rockets punched through side armor and vision ports, making even the heaviest German tanks vulnerable in the right hands. The battlefield had changed. Infantry, once forced to scatter before advancing armor, now hunted tanks in the shadows of Sicilian farm walls and city ruins. The bazooka's promise, proven in desperate experiments and factory sprints, was now reality, written in the wreckage of 17 enemy tanks, and the stories carried home by the men who fired them. December 1943, Ortona, Italy. The stone streets echoed with rifle cracks and the thunder of artillery. Canadian and American assault teams, pressed flat against shattered walls, readied their bazookas, not for tanks, but for the city itself. German paratroopers had transformed houses into strong points, threading machine gun nests through doorways and bricking up windows. Every advance was measured in broken bricks and blood. A bazooka crew from the loyal Edmonton Regiment crouched behind a pile of rubble, eyeing a fortified building just 30 yards ahead. The loader snapped a rocket into place, checking the battery wires with gloved fingers. The gunner leveled the tube at a window darkened by sandbags and squeezed the trigger. The rocket slammed into the wall, blowing open a breach wide enough for a squad to storm through. Within minutes, riflemen poured into the gap, trading grenades and small arms fire with defenders inside. Bazookas, designed for tanks, became the key to breaking Ortona's defenses. Teams targeted not just armor, but bunkers, pillboxes, and even stairwells blocked by debris. In one alley, a two-man crew fired at a cellar window suspected of hiding a machine gun team. The explosion collapsed the entryway, silencing the gun and sending survivors scrambling deeper into the maze. Field diaries from the 1st Canadian Infantry Brigade recorded dozens of similar breaches. Walls reduced to dust, defenders forced from cover, momentum shifting block by block. German engineers responded with improvised armor. Steel plates welded to doors, lengths of track bolted across windows, and sandbags stacked behind crumbling facades. But the shaped charge warhead, designed to punch through steel, made short work of these obstacles. In some sectors, defenders abandoned positions at the first sign of a bazooka team, fearing a direct hit would collapse the entire structure. The city's close quarters gave the advantage to small, mobile teams. Infantry squads, once pinned by machine gun fire, now advanced behind the cover of rocket blasts, retaking ground once lost to tanks and mortars. The weapon's versatility restored initiative to the foot soldier. Ortona's streets, choked with rubble and smoke, became a proving ground, not for tank duels, but for the bazooka as the infantryman's answer to urban fortresses. By the campaign's end, after-action reports credited the bazooka with changing the tempo of the fight, turning ruined buildings from death traps into stepping stones for the advance. Spring 1943. Kummersdorf Proving Grounds, south of Berlin. Mauser engineers in gray coveralls uncrated a captured American bazooka, its olive tube still scarred from North African sand. The launcher, seized after Kasserine Pass, arrived with a handful of battered rockets and a field report translated from English. Enemy tube penetrates armor at short range. Technicians measured the bore, weighed the shaped charge, and fired test rounds into salvaged French and Soviet tank hulls. The shaped charge impressed, but the team flagged two flaws: the tube's narrow bore limited warhead size, and the backblast scorched the firer's face. Within weeks, blueprints for a scaled-up version were on the drafting tables at Mauser and Hesag. The new Raketenpanzerbuechse 43, quickly nicknamed Panzerschreck, or Tank Terror, featured a wider 88mm tube and a blast shield for the operator's safety. The rocket, nearly twice the diameter of the American original, carried a heavier warhead capable of breaching the frontal armor of T-34s and Shermans. Hitler, briefed on the test results, ordered immediate production and front-line issue. By autumn, the first Panzerschrecks reached Panzergrenadier units in Italy and the Eastern Front. German ordnance staff issued directives. Tanks were not to advance within 100 meters of buildings or hedgerows unless closely escorted by infantry. New orders circulated: no unsupported armor in urban sectors, and all crews to improvise extra protection. Track links, sandbags, and poured concrete appeared on hulls and turrets. Field reports warned of American bazooka teams lurking in ruins and hedgerows, waiting for a close shot. German infantry squads drilled on counter-ambush tactics. Spotters scanned for rocket trails, while tank commanders ordered short, rapid dashes between cover. After-action memos from Normandy to the Carpathians recorded a shift in armored doctrine. No tank moved without a screen of riflemen. The Panzerschreck, heavier and more cumbersome than its American ancestor, became a mainstay of German anti-tank defense. Its rockets left dense smoke trails and a thunderous report, but the effect was immediate. Allied tank crews learned to fear the distinctive flash and blast from a German hedgerow. By mid-1944, Allied intelligence tracked the spread of the Panzerschreck across every major front. Reports tallied increasing losses to German rocket teams, especially in close terrain. The arms race, once measured in armor thickness and gun caliber, now ran on the speed of field improvisation and the ingenuity of ordnance engineers. The bazooka's shock had traveled full circle, forcing the enemy to copy, adapt, and escalate the battle for armored supremacy. June 1944. Normandy's Bocage country, dense hedgerows, narrow lanes, and fields stitched together by ancient earth walls. U.S. infantry companies advanced in scattered sections, each with its own bazooka team. The doctrine was simple: move close, strike fast, and vanish before the enemy could respond. Over 20,000 launchers crossed the channel with the invasion force. In the first 6 weeks, operational research tallied a measurable impact. About 12% of all German tank losses in the U.S. sector were credited to bazookas. Ambush became routine. A 2-man crew, crouched behind tangled roots, waited for the rumble of gears. The loader checked the battery, pressed a rocket into the tube. The gunner aimed for the lower hull or track. Side armor was thinner. Vision slits offered a chance. At 40 yards, the rocket hissed out, trailing smoke. A Panzer lurched, its track blown apart. The crew bailed, leaving the machine jammed in the hedgerow. Moments later, the team slipped away, tube slung low, searching for another position. Company commanders integrated bazooka teams into every assault echelon. In the bocage, tanks could not see over the walls, and infantry screens often lagged behind. Reports from the 2nd and 29th Infantry Divisions described coordinated attacks, riflemen flanking, bazooka crews targeting exposed armor. In one documented engagement near St. Lo, 3 Shermans were immobilized by German Panzerschreck teams, but the Americans answered in kind. 2 Panthers disabled by bazookas at ranges under 50 meters. Operational Research Center analysts reviewed hundreds of after-action reports. They noted that while many bazooka hits only disabled or forced abandonment, the effect was undeniable. German tank commanders grew cautious, refusing to advance without infantry cover. Some units welded spare track links and sandbags to their hulls, but the shaped charge still found its mark at the right angle. The weapon's spread was relentless. By July, every rifle company fielded multiple teams, leapfrogging through the hedgerows. Training emphasized movement, concealment, and teamwork. 1 man to fire, another to reload, both ready to relocate after every shot. The cost was trivial: $25 for a launcher, $8 for a rocket. The result? Tanks abandoned, advances stalled, and infantry regaining the initiative in ground measured by yards. Normandy's fields bore the scars of this new arithmetic, where a handful of rockets could change the outcome of a day's fighting. December 1944. Ardennes Forest. Temperatures dropped below freezing, snow drifted across foxholes, and the batteries that powered every bazooka stiffened and died in the cold. Paratroopers gathered around mess kits, pressing battery packs against canteen cups of steaming coffee, hoping for enough warmth to coax a spark. Some men tucked rockets under their coats, using body heat to keep the circuits alive. Others scavenged for dry batteries among abandoned vehicles, trading cigarettes for a working cell. The enemy pressed in from the woods, panthers and assault guns rolling through the trees, engines muffled by snow. Bazooka teams crouched behind frozen logs, watching for the telltale glint of armor through the pines. The first shot often failed. Contacts corroded, circuits shorted, rockets fizzled before leaving the tube. Crews learned to swap tubes between squads, swapping battery clips, scraping contacts with knife blades, and firing as soon as the circuit showed life. In Bastogne, a 2-man team from the 101st waited as a German martyr crept within 50 yards. The loader cupped the battery in his bare hands, blowing warm breath over the leads. The gunner steadied the tube, sighted low, and squeezed the trigger. This time the rocket hissed out, striking the engine deck and sending the crew scrambling from the hatches. By the end of the bulge, over 90 German vehicles had been destroyed or abandoned to bazooka fire, some burned out by direct hits, others left behind after a glancing blow or the rumor of a bazooka team nearby. High above the snowline, Lieutenant Charles Carpenter, known as Bazooka Charlie, taxied his L-4 Grasshopper onto a makeshift airstrip. 6 bazooka tubes, 3 per wing strut, jutted from the tiny aircraft. Carpenter wired the firing switches to his control stick, rigging the system with scavenged parts and field ingenuity. He flew low over the treetops, spotting enemy columns stalled on icy roads. Diving steeply, he unleashed a ripple of rockets, scattering German trucks and light tanks before banking away. Carpenter's sorties, flown through flak and small arms fire, became legend among the men encircled at Bastogne. His kills, 6 tanks confirmed, dozens of vehicles damaged, were logged in IDEX Tactical Air Command reports, but the effect on morale was impossible to measure. Every field improvisation, warming batteries, rewiring circuits, launching rockets from a spotter plane, became a lifeline. The bazooka's value was never just in its design, but in the willingness of crews to adapt and persist. In the frozen Ardennes, the weapon's fate rested not on factory perfection, but on the grit and ingenuity of the men who carried it. 500,000 launchers, 15 million rockets. By the war's end, the bazooka's reach spanned continents, its cost measured in spare change compared to the armored giants it hunted. Each launcher stamped at $25, each rocket at $8. The economics were brutal. One tube in the hands of a GI could threaten a $30,000 tank. Factory floors in Connecticut and Massachusetts ran double shifts, turning out steel tubes and warheads faster than the enemy could adapt. Training time dropped from weeks to hours, manuals condensed to a handful of pages. Infantrymen, many barely out of high school, found themselves tank hunters overnight. In Europe, bazooka teams multiplied. But the Pacific saw a different kind of war. Here, the enemy hid in caves and bunkers, not behind tank armor. On Iwo Jima, Marines carried the launcher up volcanic slopes, using it to blast through reinforced concrete and pillboxes. 2,000 rockets fired in a single battle, each one clearing a tunnel, collapsing a firing port, or silencing a machine gun nest. The shaped charge, designed for steel, proved just as effective against rock and concrete. Marines improvised tactics on the fly, sometimes firing white phosphorus rounds to flush defenders from tunnels, sometimes bracing the tube against the lip of a crater and firing point-blank into a cave mouth. After-action reports from Iwo Jima and Okinawa read like technical manuals annotated with sweat and blood. Bazooka used to breach cave. Enemy resistance ended, proceeded with advance. The numbers told a simple story. 500,000 launchers meant every rifle platoon could field its own anti-tank team. 15 million rockets meant firepower was never more than a crate away. The weapon's simplicity allowed for mass in production, mass in training, mass in combat. German tank crews scanned every hedgerow for the glint of a tube. Japanese defenders learned to fear the sudden roar and flash at the cave mouth. The bazooka became a force multiplier, not just for its killing power, but for the confidence it gave to the foot soldier. Armor and concrete no longer guaranteed safety. In the end, the math of war had changed. A few dollars of steel and powder could decide the fate of a tank, a bunker, or a beachhead. By war's end, American factories had produced over 500,000 bazookas and 15 million rockets, enough to arm every infantry squad and redefine the battlefield. The bazooka's debut at Fadala in November 1942, despite water-damaged rockets and no manuals, proved that even untrained soldiers could destroy tanks. As after-action reports confirmed, German forces quickly adapted, developing the Panzerschreck and ordering tanks to avoid buildings within 100 meters. Yet not all records are complete. The full extent of bazooka team kills, especially in chaotic urban battles, remains partly undocumented. What is clear from operational research is that by June 1944, bazookas accounted for at least 12% of German tank losses in Normandy. The weapon's lineage survives today in anti-armor systems worldwide. From a scrap metal prototype to a tool that forced enemy doctrine to change, the bazooka stands as evidence of how simple design, mass production, and trust in citizen soldiers can overturn the advantage of heavy armor.